Hi, and thank you so much for joining me for another exciting episode of The Little Princesses by Marion Crawford. You'll be very relieved to hear that this is a little more of an upbeat chapter because we're celebrating victory in Europe at last. So the mood will lift a little. It's been rather somber over the last few episodes, although very touching and poignant, but rather somber. So it will be a relief to have something a little more upbeat. Now, this chapter is titled V-Day and the Return to London, and it's chapter 9. For those of you new here, I don't read you the whole book, but I just read you little great bits, really, the best bits, and hopefully you'll be encouraged to go out and purchase the book for yourself. As far as the royal family were aware, my private life was entirely made up of visits to my mother during the holidays, and I'm sure it never occurred to any of them that I had ever thought of marrying. This was by no means surprising, as I'd never given a soul the slightest indication of such a possibility, and I was determined that no one was going to be worried or upset by even the vaguest hint. However, the time came in 1939, after the war had started, for me to make a very hard decision. For although it was a great effort, I made my decision to postpone the idea of marriage until after the war. If I married now, when the war was on, I would feel like a soldier who had deserted his post. The King and Queen relied on me. So duty won the battle, and I waited until after the war before getting married. But I know I was right in my decision, and the very happy life I have now is ample repayment. So, of course, that makes it all the more sad that she was so severely rejected after writing this delightful book by the royal family. Look, essentially, she was their mother through all of the war years because they only saw their parents briefly on weekends and not even every weekend. And there were entire months that went by where they didn't even get to see their parents. So Crawfie was their everything. And really, the nation has a lot to thank her for, because it was directly due to her influence and her upbringing of the then Princess Lilibet that I think we got such a stellar queen. I really do. I mean, what a wonderful woman. She gave them so much fun and she was such a great companion to them. She was just a marvellous woman. That's my opinion of her from the book. Lilibet registered when she was 16 along with others of her own age group at the Labour Exchange in Windsor, and for that moment she agitated to be allowed to join one of the women's services. "I ought to do as other girls of my age do," she said firmly. Now, the king wasn't too keen on this. He thought it was sort of invited further danger to her life, but finally he gave way. Both his daughters could be immensely persuasive and had a habit of getting what they wanted in the end, especially from their father. After some discussions with his advisers, it was decided the princess would be allowed to join the Auxiliary Territorial Service as a mechanic. So Commander Wesley arrived one morning very brisk and hearty and took Lilibet in hand, and at the depot a car was jacked up, its wheels off, awaiting her, and in the following week she was put through the whole business of taking an engine to bits and putting it back together again. There was great excitement when her uniform came. She was very proud of it, and I think the king in his own heart was very proud of his daughter for having taken this stand. Margaret was much too young to join up, and as usual she was rather cross at seeing Lilibet do something without her, but when she saw how unbecoming khaki was, I think it made her feel better. I took Margaret one day to tea at Lilibet's mess in Canterbury, which was a great treat for her. It was amusing to see how hearty all the lady officers were, drinking sherry and smoking cigarettes. Lilibet had never smoked and does not do so now, nor has she adopted the fashion of blood-red nails, but paints hers a pale pink. Now, Allah came to Crawfie at breakfast one day and said that the princess was sick in bed and she didn't think that she should go. And I went along to see her. "Oh, Crawfie," she said, "I simply must go." But Crawfie rang up the commander and discussed this, and she said that the princess had already overtired herself because she was so keen. "Tell the princess she must remain in bed until she's really fit," she said. Princess Elizabeth had always had the will to carry on in all circumstances, just as the king had done until he became really ill and unable to continue in 1948. He'd insisted on keeping up his schedule, using his human body when somebody else would have just given up years before, in fact harming himself in the process. I wonder about our current King Charles III, whether he's sort of pushing it a bit much. By all accounts, Camilla's always saying he is. She took immense pride in the fact that she was doing what other girls of her age had to do, and apart from coming back to Windsor to sleep, she kept strictly to the routine of the mess, taking her turn with the others and all the duty officers, doing inspections and working really hard on the maintenance of cars. She was a very junior officer and had to salute her seniors along with the rest. She went right through the course, and it was not till a year later, when she'd passed all her tests, that she was promoted. And even then, she was one of the most junior officers in the mess. One day she said to me, "Crawfie, Aunt Mary's coming down on an inspection, and you've no idea what a business it's been. Everyone's working so hard, spit and polish the whole day long." Now I realise what happens when Papa and Mummy go anywhere. That's something I shall never forget when she becomes Queen. And so she had an appreciation about all the effort that goes into a royal visit. Under the Regency Act, Lilibet had to act as a Councillor of State in the event of the King's absence or illness. Although she was not yet officially of age, it was a solemn office for so young a girl, who was now 17, and she was soon to be called on to exercise her office. In 1944, the King went to Italy. He flew there. It was top secret, and no one outside the family circle was told. I never knew, and although both the children did, they never told me or anyone else. Both kept their secrets with absolute trustworthiness. That's good, isn't it? It was an anxious time for everyone while he was away, Lilibet used to say, comforting herself, but General Alexander has promised faithfully to take care of him. While the King was away, a murder case came up in which a reprieve was granted, and Lilibet had to sign it, along with the Queen and the other councillors of state. After her sheltered life in the palace, this sudden coming up against the grim and sordid made a great impression on her. "What makes people do such terrible things, Crawfie?" she said, discussing it with me afterwards. "One ought to know. There should be some way to help them. I've so much to learn about people." Isn't she gorgeous? She's just so gorgeous. I'm falling in love with her even more in this book. At that time, I remember being afraid that, surrounded as she had been with so much that was tragic and depressing in her most impressionable years of life, she would lose her brightness and the love of fun all young people ought to have. But then, like the sudden blowing away of a storm, the atmosphere lightened. It was as if quite suddenly the sun had come out again after years of gloom, and victory was in the air. We began to wait for the daily papers with new hope and excitement. Things were happening. Everyone rushed to his room for the 1 o'clock news. Rocket bombs falling in Windsor Great Park had brought the wall right onto our doorstep, and then suddenly it was all over. The wireless bulletins began to read like penny dreadfuls, and the newspapers were full of pictures of the German leaders' suicides. Then came Sunday, 6th of May, anniversary of the accession of King George V. The King and Queen were at Windsor. The whole family was dressed and ready to go as usual to church. And then there was an urgent telephone call from London asking their Majesties to return at once. It was decided the two princesses should go with them and play their part in a historical occasion no one is ever likely to forget. The war with Germany ended up on 8th of May, which tells us that the anniversary is, of course, coming up, isn't it, for us? The palace was hemmed in by a surging mob of excited people calling for their Majesties. There were the usual balcony appearances, and this time joined by Mr. Churchill. At first he stood back modestly, but the King and Queen drew him forward, and he stood there beaming while the crowds yelled their approval for him. No one, not in England at that time, can realise the almost hysterical relief that came with the lessening of the awful tension we'd come through. No more lying awake at night listening, no more waking up in the early morning sound of them sweeping up a broken glass. Hitler was dead, and that ranting, awful voice stilled forever. She doesn't say awful voice, she just says ranting voice. I added the awful, because he was absolutely awful. What a pig. I'm glad he died. The two princesses remained with their parents at the palace for the peace celebrations. I went up home for a holiday again, the first for a very long time. I was still in Scotland when final victory came on the 15th of August. The two princesses wrote me telling me all about it and what a glorious time they'd had. For that night something happened that had never occurred before in palace history. The king allowed his two daughters to go out of the gates and among the crowds. Two guards officers took them and they joined the revellers outside and called with the rest for the king and queen to come out on the balcony. Now, at long last, the family could take a real holiday. They could sit back and relax, and for a short time let the world go by without them. I rejoined them at Balmoral towards the end of September, and there was an entirely new atmosphere in the castle. The king and queen were both like their old selves again. They looked relaxed and rested and years younger, and the king had found great amusement in having Lilibet take on deer stalking. Lilibet went off with the head keeper who coached her in the mysterious art of seeing the stag and recognising him before he sees you. She loved those days on the moors and promised to become a good shot. Oh, poor stags. She was so touched and pleased by the keeper's tactful care of her. They would find a big boulder at lunchtime and they would put her on one side of it with her lunch and then they would retire to the other side. The Balmoral shooting lunch was always the same, a stuffed roll, a piece of plum pudding, an apple. The wartime plum pudding never had any plums in it, but anything tasted good, especially eaten outdoors in the sunshine among the heather. Margaret felt very left out and again resentful. She was now at a girl's most awkward age, neither quite a child nor quite grown up, and she took the interlude much harder than her sister had ever done, perhaps because Lilibet had always been far more firmly disciplined. However, presently Margaret conveniently decided she did not care for sporting women. She thought shooting unwomanly and never meant to do any herself. Moreover, she did not consider Papa's +4s looked at all nice on Lilibet. So she left her sister alone with the lesson books. Margaret was rarely bored with her work. She was always the most interesting child to teach. She was quick and had a bright mind and amusing turn of phrase. I used to read to them both in the evenings and often out of doors. We read all Scott that autumn and we had some wonderful picnics. There was a feeling of leisure about it again that no one had enjoyed for years. Like I said, they had so much to be grateful to Crawfie about, reading them the classics. And she was so responsible, I think, for the woman that Lilibet became. I don't know whether she had a great influence on Margaret. The Queen, long before, had found an old abandoned little house up on the moor and had taken it on a 99-year lease. It had once been an old schoolhouse. The kitchen had a big fireplace and there was handy cupboards for pots and pans where we kept our picnic gear. This simplified life meant we did not need to drag a lot of things with them. Every time they wanted to go for a picnic in the hills, they could just get their stuff from their schoolhouse. We gathered a store of firewood and heather in dry weather and kept paper and matches there to make fires. The little house was never furnished. When it rained and we had to have our meals inside, the Queen, the princesses, the lady-in-waiting and odd guests and myself all sat on the floor. Jock, the Highland pony who carried coats and food out for us, would make brave efforts on these occasions to join us inside. He was very domesticated and passionately fond of mince and chopped up meat. We cooked our own food up there, or almost cooked it. The chef had a kind way of starting things for us before he packed up the basket. Onions were a must on every picnic. We fried them ourselves. The Queen was a great hand at cutting them up ready for frying, and she had a knack of doing it without making herself weep in the process. We also had stuffed rolls, a plum cake, and ginger snaps. I wonder what stuffed rolls were. If anyone knows what stuffed rolls were, could you let me know in the comments down below? I'm assuming it's like a salad roll or something. I don't know. When the meal was over, we used to carry the pots and pans down to the burn and wash them up there. Then the princesses would ride off together on their ponies. It sounds idyllic, doesn't it? That was an interlude I look back on with great pleasure. The war was over. We had not yet been enveloped in the trials and many tribulations of the peace. But even here there was a shadow for the king and queen, as Ella died quite suddenly. She'd gone to Sandringham for Christmas as usual. Although the children were fast growing up, the nursery life had always gone on as much as usual, with Ella always there, a constant standby and comfort to them. The two princesses often had tea with her when no one was coming and the family were alone. Margaret and Lilibet often had their baths early and dined by the nursery fire in their dressing gowns and bedroom slippers, listening to their favourite wireless program. Ella was buried at her own home in Hertfordshire near St Paul's, Waldenbury, where she'd originally joined the Strathmore family to nurse the Queen as a baby. So the Queen Mother, we know her as the Queen Mother, then Queen. Ella was her nursery maid. Isn't that amazing? Her nanny. On the coffin there was laid a wreath made entirely of violets, with a card bearing the words, "In loving and thankful memory, Elizabeth R." And of course Crawfie didn't get any recognition when she died. There was no wreaths, there was no recognition. I think they should have forgiven her upon her death at least. I think they should have gone to her funeral, not that she would have known. But, you know, I think they owed her that. They owed her more than what they perceived she took away from them with this book. That's my thinking anyway. I think she was very hardly done by. Prince Philip was abroad. We did not see him again that summer, but I knew Lilibet wrote to him and he to her, and her parents were also aware of it, and nothing was said. Then one day I suddenly became aware that she had his picture on her mantelpiece. "Is that altogether wise?" I said to her. "A number of people come and go," I pointed out. "You know where that will lead to. People will begin all sorts of gossip about you." And sure enough, it was leaked to the press. The first early rumours began outside the palace. The whispers began. Presently one paper came right out into the open and announced it was Prince Philip of Greece, the photograph the princess kept in her room. It was the first time she was permitted to choose some clothes for herself with the help of Mr. Norman Hartnell. Lilibet's taste in clothes followed her mother's closely. She chose mostly pastel shades and was from the first very attracted to silk or thin woolen frocks with coats that matched exactly. For evening frocks she mostly chose very full skirts of the picture kind. Wisely, for these suited her admirably. I disagree. I've seen her in the full skirted stuff and I've seen her in the slim skirted stuff. And in the slim skirted outfit, she looked like a movie star. She looked absolutely superb. It really showed off her figure. All Lilibet's clothes were handed on to Margaret. There is no waste whatever in the royal household. Far from resenting this inheritance of wardrobe, Margaret was always delighted to have her sister's frocks and above all her pretty tweeds. She was never quite so enthusiastic about the hats and was very angry when one astute woman journalist noted and photographed her wearing a hat that had been Lilibet's and did a caption drawing attention to the fact. Lilibet enjoyed buying her first grown-up clothes very much. The dressmakers would first bring sketches and then the models of the gowns chosen, which would be shown her worn by Mr. Hartnell's svelte young ladies. I persuaded her to get a cherry red dinner dress, as this was the colour that brought out her lovely complexion. She chose one with tight-fitting jacket made of thick silk piped with white and a pleated skirt, and this I've always considered to be one of the most becoming frocks she'd ever had. Lilibet never took the keen interest in clothes that Margaret does. Margaret, at an early age, would draw little sketches of beautiful dressed ladies and pictures of frocks she would have liked to have had for herself. Excellent designs some of them were too. There were so many things Margaret could have done with brilliance and distinction. A bit sad, really, isn't it? A change of government put an entirely new set of people in the news, and Mr. Attlee became Prime Minister, and it seemed rather strange to see him in the place of Mr. Churchill. I never knew what the King and Queen made of these changes, as they never spoke of them. Even I, who had lived so long on close terms with them, never had an inkling as to whom they liked or disliked. In the palace, their majesties were above politics. There also a new and strange element had crept in. During and just after the war, there was a servant problem because everyone found great independence during the war, and they realised that they could go off and have a life outside service, and they could go off and get jobs, and they didn't want to be servants anymore. So poor Ainsley had to go to employment services and actually try and get servants, and that was a bit distressing for the poor love. Today the staff is well housed, where many years ago they inhabited a beetle-ridden basement, where even I found it hard to stand upright. Sounds dreadful. Each household now has a private bedroom. There's a coal fire they can light whenever they want to. The king has to keep a very large staff to cope with the size of the palace and the incessant entertaining that is part of his job. And she goes on to tell about all the different staff. It's a little bit boring, so I'm just going to skip it. But I was interested to hear about the clock winder, who was a small, determined man who came in weekly to wind the clocks. He just walked in as a matter of course, no matter what was happening to be going on at the time, and attended to his job. He was impersonal as a blue bottle on a window pane. Then there was the table decker, who sounded like the florist. He came daily to fill up the flower vases all over the palace and to renew the flowers. His name was Mr. Linnet. The Queen liked to have lots of flowers about her. The rooms were always full of them. Wherever she happened to be, the scent of roses always brings her back to me very clearly now. At one time, staff meals were served in the steward's room in the servants' hall, but a new arrangement was made not long ago that the entire staff were put on board wages. They were paid more, but had to feed themselves with their own kitchens on the top floor. Only the upper servants fed together in the steward's room presided over by Ainsley. Isn't it funny, fed together instead of dined together or took meals together? They fed together. Makes it sound like horses. The servants are always very interested in the princesses and often caught glimpses of them waiting in the passages in hopes of catching a glimpse of the little girls. When there is any kind of function, everyone who wishes to come and see the royal family all dressed up and to get ready were allowed to come and witness it. Mrs. Evans, who used to be the housekeeper at the palace but has now retired, always received an invitation from the Queen, especially if there was something special like the opening of Parliament or something like that. The King is charming at these times. He likes to have people admire his Queen. He would stand and look at her and say, "How do you like that dress? Do you think that hat is just a little too much up? Do you think it should be put down a bit?" Margaret continued her regular daily lessons with me at the time. She departed for South Africa with her father and mother in 1947. Lilibet had done with lessons altogether, except for her music, and this she kept up. Both of them play the piano well and sing nicely, and Margaret with a touch of genius that would have taken her under different circumstances a very long way indeed. Lilibet now attended council meetings, but now the most important part she would one day have to play in the world was officially recognised. Mr. Churchill, his hands full enough already, often found opportunity when at the palace to discuss the general situation at length with the young girl. The advice and counsel he gave Lilibet at that time, his vast wisdom and experience, must have been of great value to her. The fact that this great statesman had found the time to do this in the midst of all his other responsibilities must have gone a long way to bring home to her how important her part was to be one day in all the country's affairs. Mr. Churchill had a very nice way with young people, and both the princesses were devoted to him. When they were with him, they were all eyes. So that's lovely. Now I'm going to skip a little bit because it does go into quite a bit of detail and it does get a little bit tedious rather. Crawfie just, really doubles down on the detail. Lilibet had learned to drive during her ATS training, and the king gave her a car of her own for her 21st birthday. She'd longed to have one for some time, and she was immensely proud of it, and her special number, HRH1, people in London soon got to know it and looked out for her and gave her a cheer. So they would never do that these days with all the security, would they? After that, Margaret had to learn. Lilibet taught her when they're up at Balmoral. The moorland roads and empty lanes of Scotland are an excellent place for the beginner. Margaret took her driving test like everyone else. She took it at the nearest town, and the driving inspector was very complimentary. She said that Margaret drove very well, with judgment and skill. When I left the palace, she was still trying to persuade the king to let her have a car of her own, but she'd not succeeded. But she drove with royal care. When she was going away for the weekend in the king's Daimler, she tapped at the window as soon as they got out of the castle grounds and told the chauffeur to come and sit beside her with her maid. She herself then quickly climbed into the driving seat beside the detective. The chauffeur wasn't at all she ought to let her drive the king's car, but what could he do? Moreover, he was extremely embarrassed at having to sit in the back of the royal car like that. But any nervousness he may have felt soon went when he realised the wheel was in capable hands. When they arrived at their destination, the car door was thrown ceremoniously open by her hostess's footman, who expected the princess to alight. But out came instead the maid and the chauffeur. That was a funny ending to Chapter 9. The next title is The Romance of the Century, Elizabeth and Philip, Chapter 10. And I hope you will join me. If you enjoy these big books, would you mind sharing them with a friend and also liking and subscribing just to encourage me a little bit to continue with them? I would love that. That would be great. I would love to increase the numbers on the books if we can through 2025. They are on every single Friday night. I don't think I've missed one except once due to illness. So I'm keeping my end of the bargain up. I'll see you again very soon. Bye.